Okay, we're taking the last step on our journey of learning to solve quadratic equations. It's not the last part of an equation solving or quadratic unit, just because we'll do some things where we actually use it for solving real world problems, and we'll learn a little bit more about the graphs of quadratic equations, some other things. But this is the last of the techniques that we're going to use. We've seen how to take the square root of both sides in order to solve an equation. We've seen how to factor the equation so that we can look at the terms really quickly and tell what the answer is. We've seen how to complete the square, and you may have watched the video that I did that's sort of in between here where we're showing you where we get this formula. But if you got confused on that and you don't remember what it was, or you watched it a long time ago, that's okay. We're going to look at it, how to actually use the formula, even if it was confusing or a long time ago. We'll get you through it. Okay, so we're going to be looking at quadratic equations, pretty straightforward types here, and we're going to use the equation that we developed in the previous video, if you watched it, that allows you to write the answer without having to go through a whole bunch of crazy steps, like trying to divide everything by 12 and then figure out what half of the middle term was, and things like that. So the answer in this case is going to be, well, C in this case, not X. Okay, so we'll have a C. It's going to equal, write the formula down first. Okay. Make sure that you have the fraction bar going all the way underneath the entire thing. The negative b and the plus or minus square root business. It's got to all be on top of the fraction. Okay. Now, the important thing to note here is that's A, that is B. Be careful, if that was a negative sign, it would have also drawn a box around it. That's B. And that, including the negative, is C. It could be a little confusing because the variable we're using in the equation is C. I shouldn't have chosen this equation, but I did. We'll just go ahead and go with it. Okay. So this C and that C are not the same thing. I'm sorry about that. Okay. So now what we'll do is take all of these numbers and simply put them into the formula. Wherever you see a B, you'll see an 11. So here's a B right there, so we'll be squaring that. Here's an A, so we'll put it at 12. Here's a C, we'll put it at negative 5. Here's another A, we'll put it at 12 again. So we'll literally just go through and put the numbers in their places. So negative B, so negative 11, plus or minus the square root of, make a big long square root sign because you'll need it. I like to go ahead and just square B at the beginning. So B is 11, so 11 is squared is 121. Okay, minus 4 times A, which is 12, times C, which is negative 5. Don't forget the negative in there. Make your fraction or your square root sign as long as you need it. Big giant fraction bar, all divided by twice what A is. So I'll just write down 24. Okay. Our next step is going to be to calculate all this. Now, be careful. If you go 4 times 12 times negative 5, okay, then you'll have to do 121 minus that number. It will be a negative number because of the negative 5. Okay? If you decide to call that a negative 4, you can't later go along and subtract it. You can't use it as a negative and a subtraction sign. Okay? So people will calculate this. I think it's going to end up being negative 240. Okay, so we'll have 121 minus negative 240. So be a little careful with that. What I like to do is just grab a calculator and calculate the whole thing. Okay? Not that I can't do it in my head, but I like to just make sure I'm doing it right. So I'm going to pause the video, get a calculator. Okay, so I've got my calculator now. I have a virtual Texas Instruments TI-83 Plus that I can use here. It actually works. I got this from VTI, Virtual TI. In order to use that, you need to own a graphing calculator. It's not really, it's not legal to download their what you need, the kind of the ROM or the guts of what you need for the calculator in order to use this. I do own several calculators. I'm a teacher here. So, sorry, I have my screen wrong here. So now I'm going to calculate 121 minus 4 times 12 times negative 5. Okay, so I'll just type the whole thing in there. That gets me 361. So negative 11 plus or minus the square root of 361 all divided by 24. Okay? Now, I happen to be a nerd enough to know that I know that the square root of 361 is 19, so I've got negative 11 plus or minus the square root of 19 over 24. Okay? So we can keep going with that. Negative 11 plus 19 is 8, and then 8 over 24 is 1/3. Okay? Negative 11 minus 19 is negative 30 over 24, and that is going to reduce to negative 5/4. Okay? So if I was doing a delta math assignment here, I would type in 1/3, press a comma, I would make a new box, and I'd get negative 5/4. So there are answers. Okay? Here's another one. Here's A, that's 2, B is negative 13, and C is 20. So we'll write down Q equals negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC. You'll have this formula memorized when you use it enough. Okay, so there's the whole thing there. Okay, and now I'll start putting things in here. Here's the first thing that gets confusing to people. That says negative B, or opposite of B. Well, B's already negative. Well, yes, B is negative, but this says take the opposite of B. So we'll use 13. That's the opposite of negative 13. Plus or minus the square root of 13 squared, that is 169, minus 4 times A, which is 2, times C, which is 20. Okay. Big fraction bar, all divided by 2 times what A is, so 4. Okay. Now, I want to calculate this business in here, and I want to do it carefully, so I'll just go ahead and grab my calculator, do it there. 169 minus 4 times 2 times 20 equals 9. Okay, probably could have done that in my head. Okay. That is all divided by 4. As you likely know, the square root of 9 is 3. So we can calculate what our answers are here. Okay. Negative 13 plus 3 is 16 fourths, or 16 over 4, so that's 4. And 13 minus 3 is 10. 10 over 4 is 5 halves. And there are your two answers. Okay. Now, occasionally they'll get a little bit uglier, so you need to be ready to clean things up a bit. You'll notice that every time we use the quadratic formula, we have the right side equals 0. So I need to get rid of that 3n squared so that I have the right side equal to 0. So I'll subtract 3n squared from each side. Okay. Now I'll have 6n squared minus 23n plus 20 equals 0. And then I'll just start putting in these numbers into the formula. Here's my value for A. Here's my value for B. Again, be careful. Negative 23 is what B is, so when you put an opposite in there, you'll find the opposite of negative 23, and then C is 20. Okay, so here we go. N is going to equal the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. Okay, let's put those numbers in there. Negative B, remember B was negative 23. Sorry, negative 23 right here, so 23 plus or minus the square root of 23 squared. I'll just do this off camera here. 23 squared is 529 minus 4 times A is 6. Don't forget, A is not 9, A is 6. And C is 20. I'm out of room here. Okay? All divided by twice what A is, so A is 6, so 12. Okay. I'm going to calculate this off screen again here, so 529 minus 4 times 6 times 20. And I get 49. Okay, so 23 plus or minus the square root of 49 all over 12. So I've got 23 plus or minus 7 over 12. 23 plus 12 is 30. 30 over 12 reduces to, well, let's see, 5 by 6, 5 halves. Okay. 23 minus 7 is going to be 16, and 16 over 12 is going to reduce to 4/3. So there are your answers. Okay. You want to be careful, though, because sometimes they don't work out quite as nicely. Okay. This one, I'm going to start by adding 5 to each side so that I get 0 over here. So plus 5, p squared plus 2p, negative 13 plus 5 is negative 8 equals 0. So now I'm going to put all these numbers into the formula. I'm just going to do it straight away. B is 2, so negative 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's going to be 4, minus 4 times a, which is 1. There's no number out front of here, so that's considered a 1, times c, which is negative 8, okay, all over twice what a is. Well, again, a is 1, so 2. This is going to be 4 minus negative 32, or 4 plus 32, so 36. Okay. This one was supposed to work out not quite as nicely. It's going to work out really easy, so let's crank it out here. That's going to be 36 in there over 2, negative 2 plus or minus 6 over 2. And so negative 2 plus 6 is 4. 4 over 2 is 2. Negative 2 minus 6 is negative 8 over 2 is negative 4. There's my answers. Okay. So I'm hoping to get one that's a little bit uglier. Let's see if I have one that's ugly up here. Yeah, let's do that one. Okay. So first, we'll add 6 to each side, so that's going to get me 3m squared minus m minus 5 equals 0. Start putting the numbers into the formula. You're going to get m equals the opposite of b. So b was negative 1. Okay, b is negative 1, so 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 squared is 1 minus 4 times 3 times negative 5. Again, that's b squared minus 4ac all over twice what a is, so 6. 1 plus or minus the square root of, let's go 1 minus 4 times 3 times negative 5. Okay, I got 61. Okay, looks like I don't need such a long square root sign here. Let's get rid of that. Okay. All over 6. Well, square root 61 doesn't simplify nicely. Okay. So what we'll do is leave it alone. We can just type it in straight this way into Delta Math or whatever you're using. Or if they want to, have to split it up into 2 separate fractions. If they're nerdy about that, that's fine too. So either one works. Okay. So I wanted you to see these things so that you would have a better handle on how to do them. So when you add 2n squared there, you're going to get 3n squared minus n minus 5 equals 0. When you put these in here, you're going to get n is the opposite of b, so positive 1, plus or minus the square root of positive 1 squared is 1 minus 4 times 3 times negative 5, all divided by twice what a is, so 6. 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 minus, what is this going to be? 61 again. That's kind of funny. You may have ended up with the same problem. Okay. So any way you do these, if you end up with something that has a square root that doesn't simplify nicely, no problem. Just type it in, say, there's my answer right there, n equals that, and you're finished.